Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Melanie Zanona in Washington, and we begin with breaking news. The Trump administration today announcing it is ending its surge of federal agents to Minnesota, and that a, quote, significant drawdown is now underway. It comes as funding for the Department of Homeland Security is set to lapse tomorrow, with Democrats and the White House so far unable to reach an agreement on reforms to ICE. Starting in Minnesota, President Trump's border czar Tom Homan making the announcement this morning that the federal government's immigration crackdown, dubbed Operation Metro Surge, is over after weeks of backlash, violent clashes between agents and protesters, and the deaths of 2 American citizens.
I have proposed, and President Trump has concurred, that this surge operation conclude. A significant drawdown has already been underway this week and will continue through the next week. The surge is leaving Minnesota safer, Minneapolis safer, because of the cooperation we got with the counties and the state and local law enforcement responding to our needs. I'll say it again, it's less of a sanctuary state for criminals.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz reacting, welcoming the announcement, but also acknowledging it marks the start of a long road ahead to recovery.
The announcement today by Mr. Homan, we are cautiously optimistic, as we've said, and that this surge of untrained, aggressive federal agents are going to leave Minnesota. And I guess they'll go wherever they're going to go. But the fact of the matter is, they left us with deep damage, generational trauma, an issue the president saw himself as being strong, certainly politically, has eroded into a albatross around their neck. And so I think, and my take was, they knew they needed to get out of here, but in very Trumpian fashion, they needed to save face.
The drawdown in Minneapolis comes as the Department of Homeland Security is barreling towards a shutdown tomorrow night, with lawmakers deadlocked over reforms to ICE. Democrats signaling they will not support another stopgap funding bill for DHS, and arguing the White House isn't seriously engaged in negotiations. Republicans, though, are pointing the finger right back at Democrats. Here's Senate Majority Leader John Thune.
We warned Democrats they were not allowing enough time for this process, but they insisted on their 2-week time frame CR anyway. And now that we have been proven right, the onus is on Democrats to agree to an additional CR to allow time to complete the negotiations. Unless, of course, Democrats are more interested in a political issue than they are in an actual outcome.
And in the Senate today, top immigration officials testified before the Senate Homeland Security Committee, facing questions about their tactics and the circumstances surrounding the deaths of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. Republican Committee Chairman Senator Rand Paul opening the hearing with this warning for the heads of ICE and CBP.
It's clearly evident that the public trust has been lost. To restore trust in ICE and Border Patrol, they must admit their mistakes, be honest and forthright with their rules of engagement, and pledge to reform.
Joining me now is NBC senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor, NBC White House correspondent Julie Sirkin, and NBC senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. Thank you so much for joining me. Sahil, I want to start with you. What has been the reaction on Capitol Hill today to that announcement about a drawdown of federal agents in Minnesota?
Hey, Mel. Well, Republicans are sticking close to President Trump here. Many of them are eager to move on from this situation in Minnesota. And among Democrats, the reaction has been twofold. They say good, but not good enough. The reason being they don't trust the administration. They say anything President Trump and his officials do can easily be undone. And that's why they insist that DHS needs structural reforms and limitations, which they say have to be codified into law, which is the main reason that DHS is on a path to be shut down tomorrow at midnight, given that they don't have an agreement yet. Our colleague Ryan Noble spoke to Senator Amy Klobuchar, the Democrat from Minnesota, who's running for governor. Take a listen to what she said.
So obviously, Mr. Homan said today that they've concluded their activities in Minnesota. Does that bring you any degree of relief?
It does some, but we know this isn't over yet. What I take from all this is that Minnesota stood up. We stood up, we stared them down, and we didn't blink. We stood up for our country and for democracy. And now there must still be a lot of work to do. And there's got to be accountability for the money spent here. I didn't vote for this $75 billion that they added to the ICE budget. I think it's outrageous. They're now bigger than the FBI. And then this agency needs a complete overhaul. But my number one focus over the next few days is to hold them to their word that ICE is out of Minnesota.
And in addition to that, Mel, Minnesota's AG Keith Ellison was on Capitol Hill today testifying. He said the demotion of Greg Bovino has been a positive development, that he's actually had some positive, constructive conversations with Tom Homan, who's taking over the situation, which he said wasn't the case with Bovino or DHS Secretary Kristen Welker.
Yeah, really fascinating hearing on Capitol Hill today. That DHS funding bill, though, it did fail in the Senate today. So, Sahil, explain to me what happens now and how long could DHS actually be shut down here?
Yeah, it's practically certain, Mel, that there will be a DHS shutdown tomorrow at midnight. Note that more than 90% of the government is fully funded, so the shutdown only applies to DHS. That includes the TSA, that includes FEMA, it includes the Coast Guard. It doesn't, for instance, include air traffic controllers. So it's a bit of a different situation than we had last fall. What's interesting here is that the two sides are actually talking and they're engaging. I was just at a press conference moments ago with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. And what was interesting is what he didn't say. He didn't say what the White House is offering in return in exchange for what the Democrats are offering. He didn't say who he's negotiating with at the White House. The fact that these details aren't spilling out tends to be a sign that negotiations are actually constructive. He did say that the White House and Republicans need to get serious, which he insisted they're not. So there's still some ways to go here. And there's also the fact that both chambers just left town. There are no lawmakers around anymore. So they're not supposed to be back until about a week and a half. If they do come to a deal, then the House and the Senate are going to have to come back from recess to vote on it. But so far, we don't even have that yet. So this could go on for a while now.
An empty Capitol and a looming shutdown, something we are all too familiar with around here. Sahil, thank you so much. Julie, I want to turn to you. What do we know, if anything, about that counterproposal that was offered by the White House to Democrats last night?
Mel, I'll pick up where Sahil left off, which is that it is a good sign that when I asked a senior administration official what exactly they put in their counter proposal that was sent yesterday, what exactly are the sticking points, they really refused to engage on it. That tells me that they're still willing to negotiate, even as they say, and blame Democrats for this impending shutdown, saying that the blame is on them for the shutdown of those critical services that you heard Sahil talk about. But when I pressed the senior administration official just a couple of moments ago, what are some of the red lines that we're talking about here? They mentioned the warrantless arrest. That has been a sticking point, a demand that Democrats have asked for. Also, the demand that these ICE agents remove their masks. That's something that President Trump had referred to earlier today. But interestingly, what they said is the administration is not going to accept concessions that meaningfully affect its ability to carry out its immigration enforcement agenda. We know the timeline on this, that the two sides, the White House and Democrats, have been trading papers since about last Saturday. So far, though, of course, we don't know exactly what the sticking points are. But I thought what was notable is the senior administration official also said is that if this isn't progress, what is? The fact that that drawdown was announced today, the fact that they gave Democrats a substantive and binding proposal dealing with practices of the Department of Homeland Security's immigration enforcement. Those are the words of the senior administration official. Clearly, they want to come to some kind of deal with Democrats. And I should note that they began that background call by saying what happened in Minneapolis was a tragic situation. So clearly a very different situation than we found ourselves in the fall when Sahil was referring to the shutdown then.
Julie Sirkin from a still snowy White House lawn. Thank you so much. Julia, I want to bring you into this conversation. You know, is it clear what's next in terms of this drawdown?
Well, it's not, and I think that's news in itself, in a way. If you're picking up on what Julie's saying, she's saying that this drawdown is in part supposed to be a signal to Democrats that, as President Trump told our Tom Yamas last week, they're considering a softer touch on immigration. Previously, when one city drew down, we knew about the next city. It went directly from L.A. to Chicago to Charlotte to New Orleans to Minneapolis, really with just a matter of maybe a half a week in between any of those cities as they moved people around. Now, Border Patrol seems to be out of the scene. Greg Bovino's back down at the border. He led some of the most aggressive tactics. And people have been speaking speaking to who are on the ground in Minneapolis know that they're leaving and they don't have plans to go anywhere next except back to their home offices. So you're talking about going from 3,000 federal agents that have been ramped up since November 29th in Minneapolis to back to their normal footprint of 150. So even if those 150 continue to be aggressive and make a lot of arrests, by and large, the people of Minneapolis are going to notice a big change in what they see in their day-to-day communities.
One thing that stuck out to me in that press conference today is that Tom Homan said that Minnesota is now safer. Put that into context for us. What does that mean, and what did the White House really accomplish here with this operation?
Well, it's a talking point we've heard a lot from the White House, and President Trump will show these stats saying that crime is down dramatically in certain cities, and he attributes that to ICE arrests. But a lot of times there's sort of unfact-checkable claims. What we do know is that 4,000 people were arrested for immigration violations in Minneapolis during this crackdown that began November 29th. That's pretty much on par with what we saw in a lot of the other immigration crackdowns. But what was different about Minneapolis is the pushback from protesters that we saw, 2 fatal shootings, and the sweeping arrests that they made when they accidentally arrested U.S. citizens. They started asking people for their papers while they were pumping gas. It really brought about a more dystopian feel, and you got a lot of pushback from that. And so I think when they look at where they might go next, or if they do go somewhere next, they're now trying to contend with even people who are, NRA supporters, saying that this went too far and was an executive overreach.
On the subject of DHS, they are set to run out of money at midnight tomorrow. Are there any plans in place for what they're going to do, how they're going to potentially keep moving money around to keep some of these programs afloat?
Well, ironically, ICE, which is really the heart of what Democrats are complaining about, and CBP won't be affected because of that money that came from the One Big Beautiful Bill. That agency went from $9 billion to $75 billion in a year. So they're not going to be hurt. What we heard today in a Senate hearing from some of the leaders at DHS is that they expect agencies like CISA and TSA to be hurt. I do think there is some reprogramming they can do. I mean, they pulled from both of those agencies to send that money to ICE. So theoretically, they could pull it back. But oftentimes what we see in a shutdown, Julie and Sahil know this even better, is that the administration wants to show there's some pain to try to move Democrats further along.
Julia, stick with us, because I do want to turn to the latest twist in this other story we've been following out of Texas of the sudden closure and then reopening of the airspace over El Paso yesterday, and then the conflicting explanations from the administration about what exactly happened. According to 4 people familiar with the matter, the closure came after U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials used an anti-drone laser provided by the Pentagon to shoot down objects that were later identified as party balloons. Yes, that's right, party balloons. That accounting of what happened contradicts the White House's statement yesterday, which claims the airspace was closed because the military took action to disable Mexican cartel drones that breached U.S. airspace. Julia, sometimes this feels like a scene out of Veep, but what do we know here about what CBP was doing with these anti-drone lasers, and why did the administration initially blame these Mexican cartel drones?
Well, I think the second part's the most interesting, but I'll answer the first, which is that we understand that this was technology developed by the military and given to CBP. They have a big problem with drones at the border. They have under previous administrations. There are drones that are being flown. Sometimes we don't know who's flying them. Often it is coming from Mexico. Cartels can use drones for surveillance so they can sneak immigrants across or even to carry drugs. And so there's a huge industry for what they call CUAS technology, that's countering unmanned aerial systems. These lasers were the latest part of that. The problem is when you use new technology like that, you have to communicate with other agencies. So this apparently took FAA by surprise. What I think we all want to know is, whose balloons were these and how far were they up in the air?
Right. Do we know why CBP would need these kind of capabilities in the first place?
So it would be for that, for these drone technologies, to try to be monitoring for that. And then in terms of what the White House said, again, just like we saw in those fatal shootings in Minneapolis, sometimes the explanation is coming far before the information is really there. So they very quickly blamed it on Mexican cartel drones, which automatically, to me, I thought, this seems strange, because our Mexican reporters, people who were talking to the officials in Mexico, said they had no indications anything like that was happening. It seemed to be a quick blame game, going back to some of the president's talking points that they should always blame immigration and anything happening at the border for any reason why something like this would happen, when in fact it looks like a self-inflicted wound.
Julia, thank you so much for breaking all of that down. Fascinating stuff. Coming up next, New clues in the search for Nancy Guthrie. Investigators confirm they've recovered a pair of black gloves that have now been sent out for DNA testing as thousands of tips continue to pour in. Plus, Delcy Rodriguez meets the press. Our Kristen Welker sits down with Venezuela's interim president, marking the leader's first interview with a U.S. journalist since Nicolas Maduro was captured by the U.S. military. That exclusive is straight ahead. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We're following new developments right now in the search for Nancy Guthrie as the investigation into the disappearance of the mother of our colleague Savannah Guthrie enters its 12th day. Investigators confirmed this afternoon that they recovered a pair of gloves during their search of the area around Nancy Guthrie's home earlier this week. Those gloves, along with other unspecified evidence, have been sent for analysis. Authorities are also asking neighbors who live within 2 miles of Nancy Guthrie's home to check their home surveillance systems for any video of anything they consider out of the ordinary from January 1st through February 2nd. Joining me now from Tucson is NBC's Dana Griffin. Also with me is Andy Black, former assistant special agent in charge for the FBI in Tucson. Thank you so much for joining me. Dana, I want to start with you because we say authorities put up a tent outside of Nancy Guthrie's home today. Do we know why?
Now, we don't know exactly why they were there. There was about 5 agents that came in around 7:45 this morning local time, and in about an hour and 20-something minutes later, those same 5 agents walked out. They were carrying backpacks. This is the same entryway where that chilling surveillance video captured a man outside Nancy Guthrie's home the morning that she went missing, when he's there tampering with the camera there. So it's possible that investigators are trying to take more investigative steps to try to identify that person. And that could be anything from taking measurements, taking photos, trying to swab for additional DNA samples. But at this hour, investigators have not disclosed exactly why they were there. Mel?
We've also seen a show of support from her neighbors. I know you've been there on the ground. Describe the scene for us outside of the Guthrie home.
You know, Mel, it has been just an overwhelming show of support over these last 2 weeks. And right now, neighbors are pulling together, trying to collect and send as many yellow flowers and roses to Nancy Guthrie's home. They are setting them just underneath her mailbox. And the color yellow is a traditional symbol for hope and the safe return of someone who is missing. So it's just been beautiful to see the community show up. Some neighbors also putting ribbons outside or putting ribbons outside of their own home as a way to show the Guthrie family that they are not in this alone and that they are still praying and hoping for Nancy's safe return.
Just a touching show of support there from the community. Savannah Guthrie also posted a new video to social media today. What was her message?
So she posted this beautiful montage. It's essentially a video of her and her siblings when they were younger. And in the first video, you see Annie and Savannah, the sisters, giving their mom flowers. She's smelling them, and it's just like one of those feel-good nostalgic videos. And then there's a photo of all 3 siblings, Annie, Savannah, and Cameron. And on the post, Savannah wrote, "Our lovely mom," and she actually used a yellow heart. She says, "We will never give up on her. Thank you for your prayers and hope." And it's just like a little glimmer to show, to again continue to humanize Nancy and the mother that she is and just how much she means to Savannah and her siblings. Savannah has made it very clear that they are like best friends. We've seen Nancy Guthrie make several appearances over the years on the Today Show. And so it's just nice to kind of see her, trying to keep her mother's name out there, in this case, very active, and to thank people who across the world now have been vested in this story, praying for her family and wanting some sort of resolution.
Dana, thank you so much for all the hard work you're doing on the ground. I know you'll keep us posted with any updates as you get them. Andy, we're now on the 12th day in the search for her mother here. Are you surprised she remains missing and that whoever took Nancy Guthrie is still actually out there?
Obviously, that was really heartbreaking footage you just shared. Obviously, everybody working this case is doing their very best. The FBI is the very best in the world in working kidnappings. They have an excellent relationship with the sheriff's department. I know for a fact the FBI personnel working this, the sheriffs, they get invested in this case emotionally. They know that time is of the essence. And if it's dragged on this long, it's not because of lack of effort.
Authorities are also trying to solve this crime while also trying to find Nancy Guthrie at the same time, whose fate remains unknown. So how much does that sort of complicate this whole investigation?
Well, it creates a sense of urgency, right, for the community, too. This case is being played out publicly. Typically, kidnapping cases, any ones I've been involved in, we're all low under the radar. The FBI always brings vast resources, regardless of who the victim is. In this case, this was all negotiated through the media and public, so there's a lot of scrutiny because of that. And we have a famous individual associated with this case. So this does add complexities. I think we got a really good break in the case, though, with that video, thanks to Google and the FBI forensics people resurrecting the video of the intruder. And I think we're very close. The FBI and the Sheriff's Department is very close to making a break in this case because of that evidence that was shared with the public. The FBI always relies on the public to help them with their investigations. Even something like the Unabomb case was made because of help from the public. And I think we're going to get that here. We have a lot of armchair investigators who are checking their surveillance videos at home and seeing if they've got an individual who matches the individual shown in that video.
I know we're all hoping for a break, of course, in this case. Speaking, though, of the complexities and the high-profile nature of this case, the FBI says it received more than 4,000 tips in the 24 hours after it released that video from outside of Nancy Guthrie's home. So could this flood of tips actually hamper efforts to find helpful leads?
It's a good thing and it's a bad thing at the same time because it creates a lot of noise. And how these cases are worked, you have a team in the command center that reviews the leads that come in and they assign a priority of it. And they work down from the highest priority to the lowest. They try to leave every no lead unturned. But again, when you have a volume like this, you have to prioritize and work your way through them. And I think the FBI is doing that. I think the public is going to come through and really help wrap this up in the very near future. I'm very optimistic.
One other thing I wanted to touch on is that investigators have returned to Nancy Guthrie's home several times over just the last several days. Why might that be?
You know, the FBI and the Sheriff's Department are keeping a lot of information close to the vest as they should. So I don't want to speculate. Obviously, they're getting either information from the community or from sources that are telling them maybe you need to look here, maybe there might be evidence here in this part of the house, but there is a reason they're doing it, but they're not sharing.
Andy Black, thank you. Up next,
thanks for having me.
Who's really in charge of Venezuela? Kristen Welker sits down with the country's interim president and the U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright in Caracas. That exclusive reporting is next. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back, and now to an NBC News exclusive. A little over a month since the stunning capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by U.S. Special Forces, Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker is in Caracas, where she sat down with Venezuela's interim president Delcy Rodriguez in her first interview with an American journalist since taking office following Maduro's ousting. The interview coming at a historic moment as U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright met with Rodriguez on Wednesday, the first time a member of Trump's cabinet has visited Venezuela. Kristen began asking interim President Rodriguez about that power dynamic. Take a listen.
Who is in charge here in Venezuela? Are you in charge or is President Trump in charge?
Bueno, yo estoy encargada de la presidencia.
Well, I can tell you I am in charge of the presidency of Venezuela, as it's stated clearly in the Constitution of Venezuela. And from the amount of work that I have, from how busy I am, I can tell you it's very, very hard work, and we're doing it completely day by day.
Are you taking direction from President Trump?
Mira, he conversado en 2 oportunidades por teléfono con el presidente Trump. He tenido contacto.
So I can tell you I have had 2 phone calls with President Trump and many more with Secretary Rubio. We have, in every single phone call, have had very respectful conversations, and we have kept a high level of cooperation and respect so that we can develop a joint work. And I must really be grateful for this level of cooperation and what we're going to build together.
And obviously, President Nicolas Maduro is in the United States. He's being detained there. Do you see Nicolas Maduro as the legitimate leader of Venezuela?
Sí, sin duda alguna. Es el presidente legítimo de Venezuela y
So yes, I can tell you that President Nicolás Maduro is the legitimate president. I will tell you this as a lawyer that I am. They are both, President Maduro and Cilia Flores, the First Lady, are both innocent. We have, and I will refer right now to the DEA reports that have repeatedly stated that Venezuela is not a relevant in the drug traffic towards the United States.
En materia de droga establece de igual manera que Venezuela no es relevante.
We have also 27 reports from the United Nations stating that Venezuela is not a relevant country when it comes to drug trafficking towards the United States. We know that less than 5% of drugs go through the north of the Caribbean and that 70% come from the equator.
Mucho que la situación se haya desarrollado de esta manera. Y creo profundamente en el diálogo diplomático.
We regret immensely this situation, and I must say that I believe completely in the peace, in diplomacy of peace, and the dialogue of, diplomacy and political dialogue. I do not believe that the diplomacy of the microphones should be used as a communicating channel.
Does that in any way make it more difficult for you to work with the Trump administration, that difference in perspective?
No es para nada difícil hacer el trabajo. Por eso he dicho.
Not at all. I don't find this a hard work to do. I truly, as I said before, I truly believe that diplomatic dialogue is the way forward.
Diplomático, político, en este momento energético. Permitirá.
We believe that political, diplomatical, and also the dialogue of energy is a channel that will crush all fake news. We know, and I know personally, that President Trump has also suffered about, with regards to fake news.
Muchas veces vemos poca claridad y veracidad en lo que se dice sobre Venezuela. Hay muchos extranjeros que llegan a Venezuela.
We salute actually the fact that NBC is right here with us, seeing and experiencing Venezuela and seeing what the reality of the country is. It has happened to us, and we know foreigners who come to Venezuela, who travel, move around the city, and are surprised about the state of the city, of the country, the development. And this, for us, is very important.
Secretary Wright said it is possible that there could be elections here in Venezuela by the end of this administration, so within 3 years. Is that realistic? Could there be elections here in Venezuela in 3 years?
In Venezuela es un país.
Yes, well, Venezuela is a country where we hold elections constantly. We have had over 30 elections, and I don't know if you know, there are some elections which are less known as communal elections, where even projects are defined. Also, we will have elections in this country, fair and free, of course, as stated in the Constitution. And also, we will need to have a political dialogue to make sure that these elections can take place.
Y decía que el diálogo político marcará los tiempos. El diálogo político con los sectores de la oposición.
And I have to tell you, the time frame for the elections will be marked and decided by the political dialogue in this country. And we know that we will have elections where Venezuelans will feel completely identified with the elections and the process.
Final question. Maria Corina Machado says she wants to return to Venezuela. Will you make sure she can return here safely and even run for president if she wants to?
Mira, sobre su vida, nosotros no entendemos por qué muchas veces se hacen.
So with regards to her life, we do not understand why there is such a fuss about it.
Debe responderle al país sobre su llamado a que Venezuela fuese bloqueada económicamente debe responder a los sectores económicos del país.
With regards to her coming back to the country, she will have to answer to Venezuela why she called upon an intervention, a military intervention, why she called upon sanctions to Venezuela, and why she celebrated the actions that took place at the beginning of January.
So you won't help her return?
It is not something that is up to me.
And here's more now from Kristen in Caracas.
Mel, it's good to be with you. The weight of this history-making moment palpable as Energy Secretary Chris Wright met with interim President Delcy Rodriguez, the highest-ranking official to hold talks here in Venezuela. Secretary Wright saying this is a part of building a bridge to Venezuela and also a part of rebuilding the crumbling energy infrastructure and economy here in this country. It was notable. You could feel the presence of the media. In fact, we are told that the interim president remarked on just how many reporters were here to capture the moment, not just reporters from Venezuela, but of course the United States as well. And it speaks to the fact that a shift is underway here in Venezuela. For her part, you could also sense that the interim president was trying to walk a very challenging and fine line, appealing both to her constituents and saying she still believes that Nicolas Maduro is the legitimate leader of Venezuela. Of course, many of them are still loyal to Nicolas Maduro, and at the same time trying to extend an olive branch to the United States, to President Trump, saying that she had spoken to President Trump 2 times, that she has been invited to the White House, and that she anticipates that will happen at some time. For his part, Energy Secretary Chris Wright trying to strike an optimistic note, but looming large over all of this. Can both sides trust each other? I pressed the Energy Secretary on that point. President Trump called Nicolas Maduro a, quote, illegitimate dictator. The interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, was his number 2. Do you trust interim President Delcy Rodriguez?
Ronald Reagan, trust but verify, trust but verify. We've been dealing with Delcy for 5 weeks now. It's been an amazing cooperation. She's delivered information. Everything we know so far has turned out to be true. She's made enormous positive changes, including already changing the hydrocarbon law in the country in the first few weeks. So I would say that cooperation's off to a tremendous start. You already feel it as you walk the streets of Caracas today, that after so many years going the wrong direction, things are going the right direction. I think it's the start of a long and very fruitful cooperation for Venezuelans.
But President Trump's been very clear. He sees the United States' role as overseeing what happens in Venezuela. How long should Americans expect that role to continue? Years? Longer than a decade?
No. I think that'll be concluded during this administration. But yeah, that's I think you will see this operation concluded during this administration, and I think we will see just a dramatically different Venezuela then. By the time this administration leaves, oil production will be up 50 to 100%. Natural gas production will probably be at least doubled. Venezuelans will get electricity not just a few hours a day, but most hours of the day. We'll see incomes rising. You'll see millions of Venezuelans returning to this country. And you'll see this northern part of South America, again, a prosperous, peaceful, American allied region of the world.
A few other sticking points. Political prisoners. The administration wants Venezuela to release all of its political prisoners, still holding more than 600. I asked the interim president if she commits to doing that. She chose her words very carefully, saying that she will release those who are not guilty of crimes. So really trying again to walk that very fine line. And then on the broader point, can she commit to free and fair elections? She said, yes, she will, in fact, commit to free and fair elections, but only once certain conditions are met. And she noted that she wants to see sanctions lifted first. She would not commit to a timeline, which was a stark difference from Energy Secretary Chris Wright, who said he anticipates there could be elections here within the next 3 years. Mel, back to you.
Kristen Welker, just incredible reporting from Venezuela. Thank you. And make sure to tune in to Nightly News tonight for more of Kristen's exclusive interviews. And you can watch the full interviews online at NBCnews.com. Now let's turn back to where we started the show, the Department of Homeland Security looking likely to be shut down tomorrow at midnight, as Democrats in the White House remain at a standstill over funding and reforms to ICE. Joining me now is Republican Congressman Marlin Stutzman of Indiana. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start with this DHS funding fight because Democrats laid out 10 different demands, including things like no masks, requiring ID, tighter warrants for judicial warrants, uniform use of force standards. Is there anything in there that you would be willing to support?
Oh, yeah. Mel, first of all, great to be with you. And, I think that's one of the things that we want to be sure that our officials out on the streets, our agents on the streets, have the tools they need. One of the things that we had put into the bill was additional funding for body cameras, also for additional training. And but Democrats seem to be backing off of that now because they don't like the idea of mass surveillance with more cameras out on the streets. But at the end of the day, we have to keep our agents safe. And we want to be sure, just like the mask list, what they listed on their list, it's just something that I would not agree with. We want to make sure that our agents are safe. They can go home without being doxxed or something like that. If their image would get out on the internet, they have to have the flexibility to do whatever they have to do to keep the agents safe.
Would you support a mandate on those body-worn cameras?
I would. I think that it's important that the cameras are on, and that way, if something happens, like we saw 2 deaths up in Minnesota, that there's plenty of evidence that we have different angles, as well as just being sure that whatever we can capture in a bad situation is captured.
President Trump said in an interview with our Tom Yamas that he needs to take a softer touch with immigration. We also have polling that just came out yesterday here at NBC that shows the majority of Americans disapprove of the Trump administration's handling of border security and immigration. So given those numbers, do you think that something needs to change in terms of the ICE tactics on the ground?
Well, I think that, we always have to support our agents, making sure that they can do their job for the safety of the community, also for the safety of themselves, and that they can accomplish what their mission is, and that's to arrest those who are here in the country illegally and that have performed a criminal act. For me personally in Congress, I'm one of the co-authors on the Dignity Act. I think that there's something that needs to be done for those who are here that are undocumented. If they are here working, there should be some sort of ability to be legal, not citizenship, but something that would at least give them a documentation. And that way they could be legally going to work. And a lot of times, for manufacturers and agriculture, construction, employers would be willing to sponsor those particular people as well if they aren't legally documented. So there has to be some sort of conversation around that, because I think that, one thing that President Trump did do that we all appreciate is he's secured the border and making sure that there just isn't this constant flow of illegals coming into the country.
On the Dignity Act, have you had any conversations with either leadership or the White House about trying to get that through the House?
Well, Maria Salazar from Florida is the lead sponsor on the Dignity Act, and she's relentless, and she's done a phenomenal job. And there's a pretty good cross-section of members that are supporting that. I totally understand those on the opposite side of me that say, look, we got to make sure all the illegals are out of the country that are here. But I just don't think that it's going to be just possible. I mean, there's too many people here that are here working, and it's also the Dignity Act also applies to those who came here before the Biden administration. And so that's a 5-year look back. Anybody that was here before then would be eligible. Those that weren't would not. So I think we should at least have a conversation at some point, because we have to be realistic.
Speaking of Congresswoman Salazar, she has been warning that Republicans are losing some of the gains they made with Hispanic voters in 2024. Do you share any of those concerns? And are you worried at all that, especially seeing some of these immigration polling numbers, that could hurt Republicans in the midterms?
I do. Because, I come from Northeast Indiana, a lot of agriculture, the RV industry. We have a lot of poultry. And, people come to work, and they come, on a work visa of some sort, or they let their visas expire and they don't have the ability to keep them up to date. I do think that we should have a conversation and find some sort of path to legalization. Again, not citizenship, but to making sure that they are here on a work visa sort of program.
I do want to turn to the other news of the day. Last night, 6 Republicans, you not one of them, joined Democrats to terminate Trump's tariffs on Canada. But shortly before that vote, President Trump put on social media, any Republican in the House or Senate that votes against tariffs will seriously suffer the consequences come election time, and that includes primaries. So do you think this was appropriate or effective for Trump to say this?
Well, tariffs is one of the most important tools that he has used for a variety of reasons, economic reasons and also national security. And so I think he means this one. I mean, this is one issue that he has felt very strongly about. And I think he's also more emboldened now because he has used them and it hasn't hurt the economy in a dramatic way. There's been some places where it's been rocky, and I mean, even from Indiana, we've seen that with like a foundry. There's some consequences there, but at the same time, it's really reset the global stage when it comes to economics and making sure that China doesn't take advantage of us as Americans with our policy. This is the tariffs, I believe, are what levels the playing field for us in business. Because other countries are just simply taking advantage of us, and Trump is really using it as a national security tool.
Before I let you go, I do want to ask about your legislation on rural housing that passed overwhelmingly in the House this week. We don't really see big bipartisan votes like that. So first, just talk to me about what this bill would mean for rural communities and how it would sort of help with the overall affordability crisis.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen the cost of houses go up. Interest rates, of course, been a big factor in all of that. And so, what we're doing is saying, let's make it a little easier for us to build homes because supply is down. That, of course, drives prices up. Interest rates would have the biggest impact, I believe, on just the ability to move from one house to another house. But we're trying to cut red tape and saying, if you're at HUD and you have one set of rules and you're over at USDA and you have another set of rules, we've got to get together and eliminate the duplicity of rules that don't make sense or that can be just uniform rather than having two sets of rules. So it's just things like that that make common sense. Also, manufactured housing was another piece that we addressed in there. Manufactured housing, which there's a lot of that in Indiana, can help fulfill the demand for housing. And we tried to, we made a couple of changes in there that would keep the cost down on manufactured housing, just trying to bring the cost down and making sure that home builders have the ability to build homes faster.
What else do you think Republicans need to do, especially in this short time between now and November, to show Americans they are trying to improve the cost of living? Is that a second reconciliation bill? Is that something else?
Yeah, well, the one that I actually support President Trump's initiative to cap credit cards at 10% for 1 year. Because over the last 5 years, and I saw this in retail and business before I came back to Congress this past election, is that people are, all of a sudden, inflation drove the cost of living up. And so people are putting more money or their expenses on their credit cards, and their wages weren't going up as fast. And so this cap on interest on the credit cards would just give them a reprieve. The American people need a break. Consumers need a break. Because they can only pay, maybe they pay $500 on their credit card. Well, that's just to cover the interest. And they just don't have enough buying power to really get back into the game. And so I think President Trump's initiative here is something that we should really address.
Do you think Speaker Johnson would put that on the floor?
I hope he does. I really do. I mean, I think that, I work with the banks a lot. I'm on financial services. I think the banks have done well. I think it's time for the American consumer to give them a break, to just get back into the game and get ahead a little bit, and they don't have to be feeling like they're just making, just every payment only covers a little bit of the principal and most of it's going towards the interest.
Real quick, President Trump said he doesn't think there's a need for a second reconciliation bill. Do you agree with that?
I think there might be a need for another reconciliation bill. It depends on how the Senate handles some of these pieces. The filibuster rule, we call it the talking filibuster rule, which we're all used to out of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, versus the zombie filibuster rule where nobody talks and we don't understand it. But I think that there may have to be a couple of issues that we address, and it's more affordability. It could be the tariff issue. It depends on what the Supreme Court rules when it comes to tariffs. But I hope that, Supreme Court gives the president some latitude. I don't care if it's a Republican or Democrat president. They should have some ability to use tariffs to be a tool to use for national security purposes.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with more Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Joining me now is my panel. Jasmine Wright, White House correspondent for Notice. Jonay Wartell, Democratic strategist who served as director for Democrats' 2020 Georgia Senate runoff campaign. and T.W. Arrighi, Republican strategist and former National Press Secretary for the NRSC. Thank you guys so much for joining us on this very busy news day and week. Jasmine, I do want to start with you. We heard about this end of the operation, the immigration operation in Minnesota. Obviously, Democrats are cheering this news. But how do you think the White House is going to try to frame this? Are they going to try to declare it as a victory?
Yeah, the White House wants to frame it as a win and not a retreat. We heard Tom Homan this morning saying that this drawdown is because of several factors, including that they have reduced the number of most wanted that they wanted within those people who they view as kind of the worst of the worst in Minnesota. They've brought that number down, that there's been more cooperation with local governments in terms of letting folks are alerting the federal government as to who they are releasing from their prisons that would be up for deportation and other issues like that. I think that that's the way the White House is framing it. Now, when you heard from Tim Walz earlier today, he said that the cooperation between local government and federal government has not changed, which we know is one of the president's sticking points, and that he would help them pack their bags. And so I think that fundamentally there was a belief that this drawdown could happen. We know that they announced last week that they were reducing it by 1,000 federal agents, that this drawdown could happen, and that's why Tom Homan was being sent in to kind of cool things down. I think one thing that the White House has to worry about, particularly from the base, is whether or not this signals to them that this is going to be a retreat from some of those more aggressive tactics that we've seen, which we know that the president's base wants to see more of, wants to see at least a ramping up of those deportations, no matter if they are violent criminals or not.
Absolutely. TW, I want to turn to you. Do you think this immigration surge in Minnesota is going to cause any long-term damage or credibility to the White House? Because we had some polling that shows the numbers are going in the opposite direction for the White House on his handling of all of this.
Yeah, and I think that's why you're seeing the shift in the first place. And a lot of this will depend how these things move in the future, how Tom Homan orchestrates this moving forward. And I think a lot of people inside the administration now are happy to see Tom Homan at the helm. He's always been one of the more responsible people. He's worked through a number of administrations. Barack Obama obviously picked him out specifically for his great work. Look, the American people, if you take polling cumulatively over this last year or so, are pretty nuanced, but pretty clear about what they think on this issue. They support immigration, but they very much disagree with illegal immigration. They support deportation, especially for violent criminals, but they don't appreciate all of ISIS's tactics. And also, they very much disagree with sanctuary city policies. So everyone in this DHS fight and on both sides of the aisle need to be reasonable. Local officials need to be reasonable and cooperate with ICE so that they can get people who are here illegally and violent criminals out of the jail cells so they don't have to get them on the street. Republicans also have to take a step back and re-examine some of the tactics of ICE. We've already seen them open the door to body-worn cameras. We've seen them obviously pull back some of the things in Minnesota. So it will take everybody being reasonable because, let's be honest, no one has the vote to do quite anything in Congress right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Janae, Americans tend to have short memories. Who knows how many news cycles there's going to be between now and November. Do you think those images of Minnesota are going to last, that voters are going to remember them when they go to the ballot box?
Absolutely. When you think about the murders of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, these images are seared and these videos are seared into the memory of the American public forever. And we talk about some of the adjustments that DHS has made, that Tom Homan has made. But let's be clear, that's in response to polling that says that many Americans feel that ICE has gone too far and they feel that the White House has not handled this properly. So I think they're really responding to their polling more than they are to the humanity and the atrocities. They need to rein in the chaos of this agency, and they've done very little to do so until the polling, now that we're in an election year, shows that the American people do not approve.
And certainly Democrats are going to try to keep it in the spotlight. I do want to turn to Capitol Hill briefly and to Attorney General Pam Bondi's hearing yesterday. President Trump was pleased. He posted it on social media today saying that AG Pam Bondi, under intense fire from the Trump deranged radical left lunatics, was fantastic at yesterday's hearing on the never-ending saga of Jeffrey Epstein. So, Jasmine, do you think yesterday's hearing was mission accomplished for the Attorney General?
I think if you're looking at that True Social, then yes, it was, right? I think that Pam Bondi continuously operates for an audience of one, and that is being President Trump. I think throughout all of the kind of scandals or questions that I've heard from sources about whether or not this is going to be the end for Pam Bondi, specifically around this Epstein issue, I think that a lot of people within the president's orbit, allies, even folks at the White House, feel that Pam Bondi has not done a good job on the Epstein issue, not just releasing those files, but then curbing all of the conversation around it. She has maintained her position in part because President Trump really likes her. And so I think if you're Pam Bondi and you have kind of reacted the way that she did yesterday, and then you see that True Social today, you're feeling pretty good about your position.
TW, I want to get your take on this hearing yesterday. Our resident Republican at the table.
Well, look, I agree with the president that I'd like to be talking about something other than Epstein. But the fact of the matter is, when you have such harsh accusations going on about so many people, when the Epstein files have so much evil within them, it doesn't behoove you to continually throw roadblocks in the way of getting all that information out there. Republicans and Democrats alike want to see people held accountable for the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein. And the quicker we can get all the information out there and do the good work to hold people accountable, the quicker we could talk about Trump accounts, the way the economy is going, low fuel costs, the no tax on tip, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. Those are the things that are going to really matter come Election Day. And the only way to get through the Epstein thing is to get everything out there and allow the information to be publicized.
Janae, one thing we've heard Democrats saying is something about the Epstein class, trying to create sort of this distinction between the elites. They're really leaning into that as a message. But what do you think Democrats should do in terms of strategy? Should they lean into the Epstein stuff come November?
Well, I think what the American people want to see is they want to see the truth and they want to see accountability. And the longer that the White House and others who are really around this issue continue to try to, as TW mentioned, throw roadblocks and distractions, the more that people are going to continue to have questions. So I think that what Democrats need to do is continue to point out the fact that the truth does not come out, that there are people who are being protected who need to be held accountable. And I think the American people really do appreciate that there are people who are still seeking truth in this scandal. And so I think what's important here is for Democrats, for members to continue pushing for truth and being on the side of right in this issue.
Jasmine, something else that happened at the hearing yesterday, probably the most notable moment, was that a Reuters photo surfaced showing Pam Bondi holding a piece of paper entitled Jayapal Pramila's Search History. It seems that the Justice Department might be tracking what lawmakers were searching when they went to view the redacted Epstein documents. I mean, is this not the exact type of surveillance and weaponization that Republicans for so long complained about under the Biden administration?
I mean, I just want to note that it's crazy how much information that we get from AP photos and Getty photos
Yes.
just across all over DC. Like, thank you for that. But it's not just Jayapal who is kind of raising the alarm on this. We've heard from Nancy Mace, the Republican, saying that she thinks that she was tracked. She has evidence of it. And then you had Speaker Mike Johnson coming out and basically saying that this isn't right. And so I think that there is, you can have a conversation about whether or not this is hypocrisy. I think if you're a Democrat, you would say that this is hypocritical. But fundamentally, I think that there is a question about what the Department of Justice is doing as it pertains to these files. And fundamentally, the question that I hear from Republicans over and over again is, why can't they just figure this out?
We'll have to leave it there. Jasmine, TW, Janae, thank you so much for joining us. We're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, and there's more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.